Hey everybody, it's Dr. Sills again. And I say again because hopefully you've watched two videos of me for this class so far, although I checked the YouTube views and it looks like some of you opted out of the videos from last week. Not a good look. Gotta keep up with that. If you don't watch these, you're gonna get a real shit grade on your next speech. So sorry, but you gotta keep up. Checking in quickly about what's going on with me, I went to the grocery store this morning because I am really, really bad at being quarantined. But what I discovered at the grocery store was that everybody is really, really bad at being quarantined because Kessler's was a freaking madhouse, man. Like super crowded, could not maintain 6 feet of distance from the people around me if I wanted to actually buy things. So I don't know if this is a really successful experiment that we're undergoing as a country here. I don't know what it's like where you are. Those of you that live in bigger cities, I don't know if they're quarantining better because people in Aberdeen seem to think that this is just kind of a stay-at-home vacation that's really, really long and you have to do work during it. But whatever, we're doing the thing. We're staying safe, we're staying healthy. I hope you're all staying safe and healthy too. And while you're staying safe and healthy, let's talk about ethics. We talked in the last lecture about what it's like to try to grapple with people, and we did that because ethics are a politically oriented thing. Yeah, ethics don't exist unless you have other people in your vicinity that you could possibly hurt. That's the whole point. So today we're going to try to define ethics a little more sophisticatedly. That's not a word, is it? Whatever. Than we did last week. And we're also going to try to introduce you to the first ethical lens that you will have available to use for your civic persuasive appeal speech. And that is ethical subjectivism. And you read about that. Yeah, I know you all read about that because that one's up on D2L. But I'm going to try to hit the high points to make it make more sense. And if you end up wanting to use this for your speech and you would like to talk about it more with me, let me know. And I can guide you toward how that's done. But first, we got to figure out what we're getting into here. So, our first area of concern today is Rachel's Chapter 1. And Rachel's Chapter 1 is about defining ethics and doing so through some kind of sticky practical case studies that I hope you find interesting. Normally in class, we have a real knockdown drag out about these case studies. By the way, if you took Honors 101 with me, these case studies will seem very familiar, and they should, but again, I never teach you something twice unless it's important. So keep in mind, this definition of ethics is super important because a lot of them are based in rules that have exceptions, or a lot of them are based in commands that don't always apply to particular situations. But this definition of ethics is workable in most situations, and that's why I think it's important for everybody to learn. So here's what Rachel's says that ethics is, and I'll say it and you can write it down, but also keep in mind it's on page 14 of the chapter 1 reading. Rachel says that ethics is the effort to guide one's conduct by reason. The effort to guide one's conduct by reason while giving equal weight to the best interest of each individual who will be affected by what one does. Yeah. So your reason. Yeah. The really important first thing in there is the act of reasoning is a component of ethics. You're actually supposed to stop and think about what is ethical to do in a situation. Yeah, so this is different than if you had a code of ethics that would say something like you should never tell lies. And that's a rule that you never have to think about, just never tell lies. Because there are situations where you might sit down and think about it and come to the conclusion that lying actually benefits all of the people involved much more than telling the truth would. Yeah? So you got to think. And the other thing, and this is the harder thing to do when you're actually trying to practice this notion of ethics, is you have to give equal weight to the best interest of everybody in the situation. Equal weight to the best interest of everybody in the situation. That includes you. And that's the really sticky part of this for a lot of people because, I mean, wouldn't you like it if you were the queen of a situation all the time? Wouldn't it be great if you were always the most important thing? Eh? If you always came out ahead. And some people live their lives that way, don't they? Like they always want to make themselves come out ahead. Here's the problem with that. If you do that, obviously you're a dick. Yeah, obviously you're not weighing everybody's interest equitably. And in practice, that's a problem because people don't want to be around you if they put yourself before them. And it also can create problems because sometimes it is better for a lot of people for you to take a back seat. So you have to consider everybody's best interest equally, and that's the crucial part and that's the hard part. But if you think about your ethical decisions and if you try to consider everybody's needs and wants and interests and benefits equally, that's when Rachel's would argue you're doing the ethical thing. So if you can do that, then cool. Critical thinking is a really good tool to have. We established that last unit. But in this case, if you can get your facts together before you get your judgments together, then you're also being ethical as well as reasonable. And also keep in mind this requirement of impartiality. Yeah, that's what Rachel calls the notion that everybody is just as important as you. And sometimes your survival instinct gets in the way with that, but this is the human condition. We live in a weird balance of our own self-interest and our need to be selfless. We have both. We have charity and we have selfishness. And if we don't reconcile those two, then either side of the line is harmful for us and other people in the long run. So Rachel's definition has two components: critical thinking about whatever you're doing, reasoning about whatever you're doing, and weighing everybody's interest equally. So going into that, and I started at the end of the chapter, obviously, but think back to those case studies of the very different kinds of individuals that Rachel's gave you to try to figure out what the ethical thing was to do. You had baby Teresa. You have to figure out if it's worth it to essentially harvest this baby for its organs. You have Jody and Mary. You have to figure out if it's worth it to kill somebody to save another person, or figure out if you should just let both of them die because that's what's going to happen anyway. Or the Tracy Latimer one, and that's the really hard one. Should you end a life to end its suffering as well as the suffering of those around it? Or is life something that you should not mess with? Is life inherently sanct, and as such, even if somebody is suffering, you should just keep them alive and let them suffer? Yeah. Rachel asks you the real hard ethical questions, and he does it because those are the things that really make you start chewing. Because if you try to analyze any of those situations and get to a point where you know what the ethical choice is to make, you have to reason and you have to consider everybody's interest equally. Otherwise, you're just making a knee-jerk decision that's it's going to hurt people. So, by the way, here's your Easter egg. Yeah, here's your Easter egg for this particular lecture, where if you email me and tell me what you think, I will give you a couple of points of extra credit. And this time it's tell me what you think the ethical decisions are in those three case studies. Yeah, read them again, think about them, weigh everybody's interest equally, and see what you think the people in the situation should have done. And let me know, and I will reward you. First by validating your clear genius in the situation, but also with 2 points of extra credit. So there's that. That's the definition of ethics, at least according to this one dude. Now, let's move on to Chapter 3. Chapter 3 is where we get your first available lens that you can use when you're giving your third speech, your civic persuasive appeal speech, to try to persuade people that your plan is ethical. And that, again, is the backbone of this unit. You are trying to persuade people through their sense of doing the right thing. And to do that, you are going to need to cite one of the theories that I talk about in these lectures this week and figure out how you can intertwine that theory and use that theory to tell people that what you're doing is correct, is right, is ethical. Pay very close attention to this first one, because this is the one that lets you have some gray area where even if you're asking people to do something that sounds a little immoral, you can still kind of be like, hey, it's a good idea because blah, blah, blah. So this is ethical subjectivism. Ethical subjectivism. And that's basically the idea that moral opinions are based in feelings. Whereas Rachel goes on and on and on about how you need to reason about ethics, this lens argues really that moral opinions are based in feelings, and that's it. You get a feeling about what you're supposed to do in a situation, you get a hunch, you have an emotion, and that tells you what's going on. And that sounds super silly when I say it out loud to a bunch of adults. But don't you get that all the time, right? Like you make a hard ethical decision and then you get that weird knot in your stomach that tells you, yeah, that was a bad idea and you should not have cheated on that test because now you're going to be real queasy after your SpaghettiOs, aren't you? Yeah, that's this. Or when you feel like that weird certainty after you make a hard ethical decision and then all of a sudden you get this surge of confidence where you're like, yes, yes, I did the right thing. And you have no idea if you did the right thing. You really don't. But something inside of you has just decided, hey, I'm going to activate some dopamine and tell you that was a good idea. And that's this too. Those weird feelings that you get that guide your ethical decisions, according to this theory, are the be all end all of ethics. Isn't that weird? Yeah? So, keeping that in mind, if you want to use this lens in your speech 3, then if you are trying to get people to make a moral decision that doesn't really have a lot of reason associated with it, use this theory and tell them, hey, follow your feelings, follow your gut. And then that helps them feel like even if it really wasn't a thing they could reason about, that they're still doing the right thing with everything. This is also really applicable if you're kind of critiquing a debate, and we have a lot of these in 2020, a debate that doesn't really have a right answer, but it's just a lot of people firing opinions back and forth at one another. Yeah, so that's ethical subjectivism because people are just going with their gut and saying what they feel in the little nugget pit of their stomach is the right thing. Now, obviously, there are some issues with this, but stay tuned. I'm going to go through some of the iterations, the kinds of ethical subjectivism, and they'll make it sound a little more sophisticated than I just did. So the first is simple subjectivism. Simple subjectivism, which it basically says that everything is approval and disapproval. Yeah. So everything is like, good job, or that was a horrible idea. Ethics don't get more complicated than that. Ethics don't get more complicated than what society or a person in your life or you says is good or bad. Isn't that simple? Isn't that nice? Like, if there's some authority figure that can just be like, good job, and that was all you had to do to process an ethical situation, wouldn't that be great? I mean, that's how a lot of us try to live our lives anyway, yeah, because that's quicker and easier. But this can be problematic. Keep in mind, when you're using these ethical lenses, they all have their hang-ups. Everything, any way you can talk about ethics has problems. Now, the problems with simple subjectivism include, first of all, you can't really account for disagreement. With simple subjectivism, if everything is just this is good, this is bad because somebody approved it or disapproved it, then you can't really discuss it, you can't really debate it, you can't really disagree with it. And that means that gray area, in this case, gone. You can't talk about whatever is approved or disapproved. Uh, Another problem with simple subjectivism, problem number 2, is that if it's true, there's no room for us to be wrong. Is there? Because if you can't disagree with something, you can't be wrong. And that means that unless we're severely internally conflicted somehow with somebody saying I disapprove of this, then you can't disprove it, which means that moral discussions no longer have any element of provable truth to them. Yeah? They're right or wrong because somebody said they're right or wrong, and that's it. You can't really, make a fact in there. So if you're the kind of person who believes that capital T truth exists, simple subjectivism is not for you because there aren't any real provable things going on, and you just have to take it on somebody's word that something is good. And that's a little stifling. Yeah? But again, simple subjectivism does have the advantage of being quick, of being easy, and of appealing to authority, which a lot of people find persuasive. There's another kind of subjectivism, moral subjectivism, though, and that's called emotivism. Emotivism. Yeah, you hear the root word in that? It's emotions. And hold on to your hat because that's about to be really important. This is a philosopher named Charles L. Stevenson's approach to trying to fix the problems with simple subjectivism. He's saying that we need to draw a distinction between morality and fact. He says the reason that simple subjectivism can't prove facts is because it doesn't need to, that morality exists outside of the realm of truth. Yeah, hold on, it gets better. So, moral language is designed to persuade. That's what Stevenson says, that we only really have discussions of morality because we're trying to persuade people to do one thing or the other. And so Stevenson says that there's a difference between having a disagreement and a need for persuasion about facts versus a disagreement or need for persuasion about attitudes. So in moral discussions, he says you just have to admit that all we're disagreeing about is attitudes and then leave the facts out of it. Yeah? So that's an interesting place to stand with this because in some ways it does make a lot of sense. Yeah? The next time you have a big ethical disagreement with somebody, stop and think. In this debate, am I really relying on facts or am I just trying to convince somebody that my attitude, my like or dislike or belief in something is correct? And I think you'll find a lot of the times that's pretty true. And it can be kind of, disturbing for you because you're like, no, I think great truths all the time. But, yeah, you think your own attitudes all the time. That's how that works. Now, your attitudes could be based on fact, but when you're having a moral discussion, that's not really what you're thinking about, is what Stevenson argues. Anyway, now, the problem with emotivism, is that it takes reason out of ethics, because if you can't prove anything and you don't even feel like you should be proving anything, then you don't care. Facts are out the window. Thinking is out the window. You just say, here is my stance on a thing and it is correct because I have decided that it is, and you're done. So, although it is very common, emotivism is very common, it's not the most, cerebral, it's not the smartest way to look at making any kind of ethical decision. But those are the two kinds of ethical subjectivism. And this begs the question, why are these attractive? Yeah, because although, as we've established, they are widely practiced when people are making ethical decisions, they're also a little insulting, aren't they? Because they take out facts and they take out reason, and that can be uncomfortable for people who like to think they live in a world of truth. But it's attractive. Ethical subjectivism is attractive because it's comfortable. It lets us kind of stay in our own ideas, stay in our own mindset. It flies against everything we learned about in the last unit, but that's okay, because when you're trying to persuade people, keep in mind, they have never had to give the coin flip speech, and they like their opinions, and they want to glom onto them without considering an alternative. Ethical subjectivism lets them do that, and as such, taking that stance can be insanely persuasive. And also keep in mind, there are things that cannot be proved or disproved. And that may come as a shock to some of you that really like to believe in capital T truth, but are there some things that there's no way anybody's ever gonna know outside of, mathematics advancing and in a way that's going to give us insight into the inner workings of the world? We don't know. So, for those things that cannot be proven or disproven, all we have is our own hunches, all we have is our own attitudes. And this ethical subjectivism at least acknowledges that and lets us still make decisions. And that's helpful. Yeah, that's helpful for a lot of things. So, it's comfy, and in some situations, it's necessary. Now, Rachel's. Rachel says that we don't like morality, honestly. In this chapter, he says we don't like morality because it's really hard to persuade others that our morality is correct. And that just makes us annoyed with the whole enterprise, and it makes us feel alone. So, a lot of people are turned off by ethical discussions. But at the same time, he does caution us that we have to hold ourselves accountable to ourselves with our moral compass, or at least with the perceived correctness of our own beliefs. So even if you're reading this and thinking, yes, I believe in ethical subjectivism because that means I don't have to fight with people, you have to fight with yourself, and you should fight with yourself. If you go through your whole life never questioning your own ethical stances, that's a giant problem because life doesn't stay the same. And you may have come to ethical decisions when you were 5 years old, like I shall not tell lies. But then as you get older and you have more lived experiences, things change, and you should change with the things. That's what he's trying to do, by the way, at the end of chapter 3 with his discussion of homosexuality. He's trying to debunk a popular argument using an ethical lens to see if he can make people reconsider their own stance. So give that a shot, read through it, and see what that does for you in terms of making you question yourself, your own beliefs. So should we be ethically subjective? Or should we hold ethics accountable to proof, to truth, to facts? I'm going to leave that up to you. And depending on your speech topic, one of those may be a truer option than the other. But keep in mind, you are going to have other lenses that you can use to make people think that you're ethical in your speech, but this is one of them. It's a useful one, and I'm excited to see what some of you do with it. So thanks for listening, and I will see you in my next video, which I'm probably going to make right now, but if you need to take a break, get up, walk around, maybe take a day to process the deep thinking that you had to do here, totally fine. Whenever I see you again, I will see you again. In the meantime, I look forward to those emails about what you would do with all of those ethical dilemmas. All right, bye, y'all.